conventional medicine didn't really play much of a role in my healing. And in the end, actually what healed me, how I healed myself was through a combination of eating really high quality foods and the combination of not eating at all. We're looking for the quick fix. We're looking for that magic bullet, and this is probably as close to an easy, simple, free magic bullet that ever existed.
I got more mobility change in 2 days of water fasting than I did in 3 weeks of therapy. And my therapist, last Thursday, my 4th day into it, he says, "What are you doing?"
The advice we give to cut a few calories is a complete failure.
If you compare a population of people who never dieted to a population of people who diet, the dieters end up weighing significantly more than the non-dieters 5 or 10 years later. So we need to find new solutions.
When someone does fasting, it's very different than when someone simply cuts calories.
So when you fast, you can look at studies and you'll see that the basal metabolic rate does not go down nearly as much as the calorie restriction.
There's always a sweet spot for everything. If you fast for too long, we'll say if you go out more than, say, even 10 days, your metabolism will slow. And that's what happens to people if they try to cut calories for a very long period of time. Their metabolism slows, and when you start refeeding, you will regain the weight and regain it very quickly.
There's a difference in fat. The fat that you carry around the waist is much more dangerous for you. This study was just published last year. So if you look at truncal fat mass, caloric restriction versus alternate daily fasting, the fasting was 6 times better at getting rid of the dangerous fat.
My plan is to do a 7-day fast. In 9 days, I've lost 18 pounds.
I went 7 days and I've lost 20 pounds.
I thought, no way could I go this far and not be hungry.
Lots of people have noticed the past couple days how thin that I look already.
And I'm on day 21 of my 21-day fast, and I've lost 33 pounds.
Your mind is more clear.
You're actually going to be more alert, you're going to have more energy and more time.
We've been skiing for 3 hours, and I haven't eaten for 6 days. I feel plenty energized. Woohoo! I feel like I'm almost on vacation by not eating.
The ancient Greek mathematician Pythagoras, in fact, he required his students to fast before they came into the classroom. Otherwise, he thought they wouldn't be smart enough to figure out what he was doing.
So my mind feels as good as it's ever felt.
When you look at fasting, it's going to give you the ability to do all those things at a higher level than you've ever done them before.
A lot of people ask me, how do you stay so fit at 44 years old? And I quite simply look them in the eye and I say, fast before fitness is the ticket.
Activating your body, the sympathetic nervous system, noradrenaline, and growth hormone all go up during a fast. You actually can work out harder than you've ever done.
I've always worked out on an empty stomach, in a fasted state.
The challenges about fasting is that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and there are several different types.
Whether you're talking about an overnight fast, or you're talking about a 24-hour fast, or you're talking about 5-day or 10-day or 20-day, people and journalists and everybody likes to use the same word, right? And this is very confusing because each turns on a completely different process.
This is happening now in practices like mine all over the country and in the world, people learning, and hopefully we'll all communicate. And one of the beauties of a film like this is that it will bring attention to the whole concept of fasting, because so many people know nothing about it.
For the last 50 years, we've told people, eat 6 meals a day, eat the minute that you get up, within 30 minutes of getting up, and make sure you eat a bedtime snack so you don't get hungry. The problem is when you start eating the minute you get up and don't stop eating until the minute you go to bed. You're constantly telling your body to store food energy, right? And you can only either store it or burn it, right? You can't do both at once.
And even now, many personal trainers and nutritionists try to eat something in every 2 to 3 hours you are awake. And if we are awake for 18 hours, then that's a long period of eating.
The whole problem is eating all the time. So the very word itself, breakfast, is the meal that breaks your fast. And it's actually a very interesting word because what it means is that fasting is a part of everyday life. It's something you need to do every single day because it's the flip side of eating. It's just the B side of eating. There's nothing scary about fasting. So if you fast for 12 hours and eat for 12 hours, or eat for 10 hours and fast for 14 hours, for example, you'll stay in balance. And guess what? That's what they did in 1960s America. You can look back at surveys, and the average number of meals, 1977, is 3 meals a day, right? So I grew up in the 1970s. Breakfast, lunch, dinner. Nothing else. Snacks? No. Guess what? They're eating white bread, there's no whole wheat pastas, right? They're eating Oreo cookies, they're eating ice cream, but there's very little obesity. Now you go to 2005, and the survey, the NHANES survey, which is a large American survey of a lot of things, including dietary habits, says that we're eating 6 times a day. So, again, look at my son's schedule. Breakfast, mid-morning snack, lunch, after-school snack, dinner. Oh, hey, he's playing soccer. There's snack between the halves of soccer. 6 times a day, every single day. So he's giving his body instructions to store fat every minute of that waking day. And then we wonder, why is he gaining weight? Well, it's no mystery. You're eating all the time.
We would never even consider starting to cook until 7:30, and we'd usually eat around 8.
We might get home and eat at 8 or 9 o'clock and have a big meal at 8 or 9 o'clock.
And it was a grazing after dinner that was going on.
So it's the length of time that you let your body kind of burn that food that you've taken. That's basically it. You're giving your body time to digest it.
If you have them continue their same type of food intake and about the same number of calories, but you shrink that eating time down, they will lose weight. And they'll feel satisfied, and they won't feel miserable because we didn't put them on a 1,600 calorie diet.
I've not necessarily eaten well. I've been overweight, sometimes up to 200 pounds.
Like everybody else, I've gained a pound or 2 a year since I was 30.
About 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. My A1C was over 14. And I had no idea that it was out of control the way that it was. I knew that I'd probably had it based on the symptoms. So I just tried to control it with diet, medication, but in the end, it just wasn't working for me, what I was doing. So I decided it was time to switch doctors, got a recommendation to Dr. Julie, and she rocked my world.
First came upon that study, Dr. Panda's study. It was very easy to understand. It's so elegantly done that someone who's not in high-level research could understand this paper.
Big, gnarly study with a lot of detail, tons of charts and graphs, big words. I'm back and forth with Wikipedia. Took like 4 hours to get through that study.
They embrace the information because it's something new, and it is a void in most people's knowledge base in terms of nutrition and diet. And it does sort of dispel this myth that you need to eat before bedtime or you need to have protein before bedtime to build muscle mass.
So on the flight back to the West Coast, I read it again for 4 hours. It was on that flight that I said, I gotta try this.
So the simple experiment that we did was we took genetically identical set of mice.
One group was eating ad libitum, so they got to eat their food throughout the day whenever they wanted to eat it. And both these groups of rats are on a super size me diet, like that guy from that movie.
I started with a high fat diet because there are 11,000 research papers published so far where animals or humans are given this fatty food, and this fatty food causes different diseases, starting from diabetes, obesity, liver damage, cancer, and IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, etc.
The lean mouse, without a doubt, became obese, gained weight. The lean mouse that was on the time-restricted regime actually stayed lean, and that's really what caught my attention.
So even though they eat the same amount of calories, at the end, the time-restricted feeding mice are lean compared to the ad-lib fed mice.
And they could stay progressively fitter, and all they had to do was change when they eat, not what they eat.
Your body needs a daily fasting period, and that eating erratically and kind of eating all over the day takes away from our body's natural rhythms to say this is when we eat, this is when we rest, and it's hitting a manual override button.
We work with the circadian rhythm. Our bodies are on a clock, basically, which is aligned with the 24-hour rotation of the Earth.
The circadian rhythm in turning on and off of more than 10,000 genes is the largest regulatory network that we know that exists in human.
Circadian rhythms in the liver, the pancreas, and the fat cells get tremendously disrupted when you eat late at night or when you eat for more than 12 hours during the day.
So if the liver clock tracks when we eat, then forget about light-dark. What we have to be more careful about is when we eat and when we fast.
And we have to stay in beat with Earth in order to be healthy. So we really should stop eating by 7 p.m. at the latest because our pancreas goes to sleep.
Just before you wake up, somewhere around 4 a.m., growth hormone, adrenaline, and so on all get pumped up. You're basically activating yourself for the day. So for all those people who say, oh, you have to get up and eat because you're not going to have energy, like your body has already prepared you for everything you're going to do. You don't need to do it again.
And so during the day, we need to be able to go out and hunt and get our food and do all those kinds of good things. So we need access to energy. We need to be able to metabolize energy quickly. And we need to be able to make sugar as quickly as possible. And we also need to be able to oxidize fats for energy.
So at night, we can't absorb the fat and the salt and the sugar. Your body just takes it and shoves it right into a fat store.
In the evening, once we get ready for bed, our body switches to another mode, and the circadian rhythms for processing energy go down, and the circadian rhythms that help with the repair of the body, finding cancer cells, renewing all of the bodily systems kick in, and those are the strongest during the night. Immune system function, etc. If you eat during the night, you disrupt all of those mechanisms, and so not only are you predisposing yourself to diabetes and obesity and hypertension, but you're also predisposing yourself to a pro-inflammatory condition throughout the body, which makes it easier for cancer to take hold.
If you're trying to repair a highway, you have to stop the traffic. So similarly, our body cannot repair itself if we continue to eat.
The body makes less insulin, so for the same sugar load that you would give yourself during the day that would not cause your blood sugar to rise significantly, that same sugar load after about 7 or 8 o'clock at night will cause a significant rise in your blood sugar, mimicking the effects of diabetes.
It was a study that came out in a neurology journal that found if you were giving artificial nutrition in the hospital, that patients did better if you didn't give it around the clock. They gave the nutrition in a shortened time frame. They're connecting the person back to the day cycle. They have a better outcome.
Just having weighed myself this morning, 2 months now have gone by, and I've dropped somewhere in the neighborhood of 29 pounds just with Dr. Julie.
It wasn't hard to do because it was just a small habit change that I had to ask them to make. All they had to do was apply this, shortening their total time of eating during the day.
Hi, Dr. Julie.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Thanks for coming today. Yes. So we're going to go over your blood tests, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had them drawn already?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
So when I have people come in and they'll tell me, oh, well, my parents have high blood pressure, so that's probably why I have it. It's not always a genetically inherited problem. It's possibly a lifestyle inherited problem because we carry with us the type of habits that our parents brought us up to have. And if late night eating and indulging slightly on the weekends was something that we saw them do or that we were allowed to do growing up, then we're going to carry that habit with us.
And that first night was a struggle. I remember getting off my plane down in Burbank and getting ready to take an hour-and-a-half drive to Santa Barbara and thinking, okay, where am I going to stop to get something sweet for the road? And wait, it's past 6 o'clock.
And I found that the first week was very uncomfortable. I mean, I went to bed with hunger pains and that's all I could do to stay on this time-restricted eating time frame was to go to bed early so that I wouldn't feel hungry.
And Dr. Julie had given me the advice that the first 2 weeks were going to be very hard.
After about a week, those hunger pains completely went away.
And she was right. But I was glad she shared that because it prepared me.
And then after that, it was no cravings. So it was really strange, but cravings for food later in the evening just went away.
Your liver tests look fantastic. In fact, they were lower than they were before. The
Okay,
previous
I'm
time.
glad.
Yeah, so your fatty liver is completely reversed. You have totally normal liver enzymes.
Okay.
And you did it purely by just lifestyle changes. Within a couple of months, you can have reversal of fatty liver. You can start seeing blood sugar changes in less than 2 months. I mean, it's like better than medicine.
Deborah was a new patient to me.
My concern is that I've been told I should take blood pressure medicine to control my blood pressure.
Her one fear was being on a blood pressure medicine for the rest of her life.
Yeah, I think it had gotten in the 150s and 160s.
Okay. And her blood pressure was running in the hypertensive range, so she was running over 140s.
Just didn't like the side effects. I was falling asleep at the wheel.
And she was given the recommendation of trying to just restrict her eating time to about 11 or 12 hours. And 2 weeks later, she came in and her blood pressure was normal. 120s to 130s systolic.
Blood pressure read, I don't know if you have it, there was 126 over, yes, it hasn't been that for a while.
And she came in again a few weeks later and her blood pressure was normal again.
It's like your daily medicine. These medical conditions, we should be thinking about them as really symptoms, right? I mean, it's really not a medical condition because it's totally reversible. You noticed a sleep improvement with adopting this lifestyle change over some of the other things you had tried before.
And a much sounder sleep.
Yeah,
so
that's interesting because I hear people bring that up to me.
Essentially, she's not a hypertensive patient any longer.
I located Dr. Julie Weishatzel and I said, I really, really need to get this weight under control. It's out of control. She said, would you be interested in participating in a study?
Trying to do now is to expand this study. That original study was done in 150 adults in San Diego. We are now running a worldwide study. We have almost 9,000 users.
She explained to me about the circadian clock app.
Now with the launch of this app, My Circadian Clock, we have close to 10,000 people who have downloaded.
I downloaded his app.
And so I went through the process of taking pictures of the food that I ate every day, and then also making sure that I fasted for a minimum of 12 hours, each night, like with dinner being at 6 o'clock.
First 2 weeks, we ask you to log everything you currently do. And then at the end of those 2 weeks, you get a summary of everything that you've done. It's kind of shocking to see how much you forget, and when you look back and have the hard evidence, it's really helpful.
Using that app is really, to me, much more useful than using something like Fitbit, because you're going to maximize your circadian rhythm, and all of your organs run on circadian rhythm.
I think one of the exciting things that we've seen is that people are pretty able to adapt to this style. If you say you can still have that piece of cake, but you just can't eat it after 6 p.m., people are a lot more open to that, and they'll adjust when they eat their types of food and say, okay, you know what, I can have it in the morning.
Within about 8 months of about a 12-hour fasting window every day, I found that my triglycerides had gotten well below any number I had been able to achieve previously, and I also found that my A1C had also fallen to the lowest point it had been in years.
I realized so much benefit so fast. In the first 90 days, I lost 11 pounds, and in 180 days, I lost 16 pounds. I'm trim anyway. I was 153 pounds when I started. As I got through that, I wrapped myself around the mantra of don't change what you eat, just change when you eat. So I actually might have started eating worse. So I could have confounded the study a little bit by eating worse because I felt like I could eat whatever I wanted and I was getting good results. I wasn't dieting. So after that study, I met with Sachin and I asked him about that, and he kind of chuckled and laughed and said, no, Bill, don't eat whatever you want, but do control when you eat.
My blood pressure was elevated. I was on medication for high blood pressure as well as for cholesterol. The past year, since using time-restricted feeding, I've lost 20 pounds. My blood pressure is excellent, and I'm no longer taking a statin drug.
Implementing time-restricted feeding is an easy first step to take. It has no cost, it has no side effects, and it feels so much better than taking medication.
In 2004, I decided to take a personal challenge and I was going to try a triathlon. I tried a half Ironman. So that's a 50-mile bike ride, a 1.6-mile swim, and it was a 12.1-mile run. My performance has degraded over the years to where I'm doing just sprint triathlons. That's 1/4 of that half Ironman. You would have thought that I would have progressed to actually doing the full Ironman. So I haven't. Well, it turns out that I have a cardio condition where my heart beats super rapidly and irregularly, but what'll happen is it'll beat at 250 to 300 beats a minute, and it's like a boat cavitating a propeller that's just, it doesn't bite, and so there's no blood pumping through my heart, and I get all lightheaded and I might pass out. It can happen anywhere. And so I've progressively been doing shorter and shorter distance triathlons. At the end of the study, it was allowing me to run longer and harder, to ride farther and faster, and to swim longer and more smoothly. And so I felt like this next triathlon, I'll see how I do. And I went ahead and I signed up for the Olympic. That's a double sprint triathlon. And so the interesting short of it is no cardiac problems, completed the Olympic triathlon.
If you can just implement that first portion of it, then the rest of the healthy changes will come along.
When you put the mice on a treadmill, very well like you would do for a human treadmill, they run much longer when they are on time-restricted feeding than the ad-lib-fed control, suggesting that there is some cardiovascular benefits to time-restricted feeding.
I'm up in the morning, I feel like I'm alert quicker than I have been previously.
I would say that obesity is probably the single major largest challenge in America these days in terms of overall health and chronic disease.
The category of people who are very obese, and they're not necessarily consuming significantly more calories. Oftentimes these people have some difficulty sleeping through the night, and so if they're getting up later in the evening or early in the morning, they'll just go and have a snack. They'll have something to eat or something to drink. That actually increases their total eating time to much greater than 15 hours. In fact, they may be eating 20 hours a day.
Flying back on the plane, I'm reading the study, I'm starting to understand what's going on. There was a third group of mice that was really interesting. They had a control group that was 5 days on the time-restricted feeding regime and 2 days off. And so the idea is that might mirror our 5-day working schedule and our 2-day off schedule.
So I wanted to try whether you could party on the weekend. So I had one group of mice that were only on time-restricted feeding during the weekdays, but then they would have full access, so 24 hours access to food during the weekends. So we call this the 5T2A regimen for 5 days on time-restricted feeding and 2 days of ad-lib, starting on Friday night. Good news is there's no difference between being 7 days in time-restricted feeding or only 5 days on time-restricted feeding, at least in mice. So if you're mice, you can party on the weekend.
All of healthcare should be embracing this. We should be using this.
We're really not telling people what to eat, we're telling people when to eat. I think that this could give us an excellent way to initiate a long-term and effective treatment for obesity.
Even if you eat healthy foods after 7 p.m., you actually push your body, you push your pancreas, your beta cells, and you actually become more inclined to develop prediabetes and diabetes.
When we compare the high-fat diet-fed animals and the ones that were on time-restricted feeding, there was a massive difference. Basically, the ones on time-restricted feeding, they don't have this type 2 diabetes problem anymore.
From what I've seen, when someone adopts time-restricted feeding, that's all they need to do. That's all they need to do to completely reverse this hyperglycemia, to completely take them out of this pre-diabetic state. I had one woman who was running pre-diabetic for 2 years. We had her follow time-restricted feeding for a few weeks, and her blood sugar came back normal, absolutely normal. We tested her again a few months later, and her blood sugar was again normal, as well as her hemoglobin A1C. And that hemoglobin A1C is a marker for your blood sugar over the past 3 months. And so for her, the burden of developing diabetes was completely lifted. She didn't have to worry about that disease entity anymore at all.
Diabetes is completely off the chart. Metabolic syndrome is off the chart. We can't solve that with drug interventions. But a cultural change where we learn to eat in that window that we were at before, that seems kind of doable. It's the kind of thing that a group could start. You could teach children in school. We could observe that at home. We could walk the talk. And that might make such a big difference on a national scale that it actually moves the needle.
If physicians are more involved in helping people make this lifestyle change, I think it will be an overall cost savings for just medicine in general, because we're going to be spending less on medication. We're going to be spending less on disease. You know, that Supersize Me guy should do his whole routine again. You know, he should do his whole eating that Supersize Me diet, but under a shorter time frame. And I wonder if he'd have all those, health effects.
What we're doing here is really reversing all of type 2 diabetes and all its downstream complications with fasting.
I've worked with Jason for 17 years in nephrology, and we're just watching our patients die from diabetes, essentially, watching them get more and more obese, watching their blood sugars get worse and worse and worse. Their medications go through the roof. They're on 2 or 3 pages of medications, and every time we saw a patient, they're on more and more drugs.
And I was basically holding their hand as they had their heart attacks, as they went on dialysis, as they developed kidney failures and strokes.
That's how we got into this in the first place. It was really disheartening to watch people die before our eyes.
So one day, I was talking to a friend, and she was talking about doing a cleanse. And I realized that really what she's talking about is a fast. And I thought, wow, that's a really stupid idea. But then I thought for a second, okay, well, this was my initial reaction, and most people have that same sort of eye-rolling reaction to the word fasting. And I thought, okay, but I'm a physician. What exactly is it that's so bad about the fasting? Because she actually had pretty decent results. She always says she feels better, she doesn't feel hungry, and I thought, okay, well, that's very interesting. So then I started to look at the fasting, and I thought, why not? Why not have people fast? I mean, what, honestly, is more obvious than fasting? If you don't eat, your blood sugars will come down, and you no longer need your diabetic medications. Hey, that's great. If you don't eat, you will lose weight. Hey, that's great. Where's the downside?
Anne's hemoglobin A1C was so high that the lab couldn't detect it.
Groups like Alcoholics Anonymous and Weight Watchers, they're all group-based sessions.
So, Anne, can you tell us about your first fast?
They're not individually counseling sessions because you're losing a very important support structure there.
Yes, Dr. Fung said 7 or 14 days.
So that's one of the lessons we've learned, and we've gone to these kind of group sessions.
In the beginning, it's a pain in the butt to get over that, the first 2-day hump, and then after that, it's really easy. It seems really easy, and I can't believe I'm not eating. So I stopped at 10 days.
Since then, you haven't touched insulin. You haven't needed to.
If I went Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but then you're going through those hunger pains, where your stomach's growling, you feel like you get ravenous, like you could eat a horse.
Yeah. What reading did you get this morning?
I got down to 6.4 in the morning, yeah.
So I started intermittent fasting about 5 years ago. Within 6 months, I had reversed my hemoglobin A1C from 6.4% to 4.6%. I was diagnosed with fatty liver disease when I was 12. In 6 months, no more fatty liver infiltration. Another thing that I was diagnosed with when I was 14 was polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I would go to the hospital all of the time from cysts rupturing and it just being so painful. You couldn't bear it. About 6 months into fasting, everything sort of regulated. And when I saw another specialist later on, my OB, and we started talking about it, and she said, Megan, when was the last time you had a cyst rupture? And I said, I don't know. I don't remember. And I said, I know my periods are regular now. And So she sent me for an ultrasound, and everything anatomically, there was no sign of polycystic ovarian syndrome, none at all, which was pretty mind-blowing. And my progesterone hormones and all my fertility stuff, and it was all fantastic. It was so much better than it was when I was a teenager or in my early 20s when they had measured those. So fertility for me is not really going to be an issue anymore. And I spent most of my life thinking that I wouldn't be able to have babies. And they actually saw me improve. So I think that's how we got some initial success and how our program really started to snowball. People just didn't want to die from diabetes.
But I was walking with a cane. I wasn't breathing well. I had put on 130 pounds with the insulin.
Patients come back to me with incredible stories.
I was taking 210 units of insulin a day. I did the 21-day fast, and I haven't had insulin since. I've lost close to 100 pounds.
So every day I come in, almost every single day, I come in and I say, wow, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, look, your numbers are such to the point that you are not classified as diabetic. That is amazing.
It saved my life, is what it did.
You're off the cover still too for your blood pressure, so you're off of everything. And around her waist, she has lost 27 centimeters.
Sometimes people find that when they fast, that a lot of these cravings just stop.
Well, my control is vastly improved.
Energy is unbelievable. As I said, I was walking with a cane.
You've got to treat everybody as individuals, and that's what we do. So we see all different regimens, we use all different regimens.
I stop eating at about 7 in the evening, and after that it would be just liquids until dinner the next day.
Avocado, slice it up with 2 eggs, and I will eat that maybe about 10 o'clock in the morning. I do not eat again until maybe 3, 4 o'clock the next day. That's almost 36 hours. I don't even feel hungry.
We can tailor it to people's needs. If you need it for weight loss, then I can give you something that's going to do weight loss. But you only want to do it for, say, overall well-being, mental clarity. Well, I'll give you something different.
Sometimes it's 7 days. It depends, okay? When I feel that it's not comfortable, then I will take longer one.
And the key rule, and especially for the elderly, is if you don't feel well, stop, let us know, let's reevaluate.
After have a dinner or lunch, then you have to keep 36 or 24 hours fasting. That's what I prefer.
But the financial benefits are actually just mind-blowing, right? Because think about it, you have type 2 diabetes, obesity, you've got all kinds of costs.
And I had a new consult a couple weeks ago, and he said, I watched my grandparents follow the guidelines and I watched them die. I watched my parents follow the guidelines and now I'm watching them die, and they're going to be dead 20 years before my grandparents. And look at me now. I'm diabetic, I have fatty liver disease, my eyesight's going to hell. I don't want this to be me. Clearly what they're doing and the method of treatment that these physicians are having had my grandparents follow and are having my parents follow don't work.
You've got your medications, you've got surgeries, you've got heart attacks, very expensive, strokes, hospitals, you've got stuff you need to pay for nursing care, you need to pay for nursing homes. So an incredible amount of cost, all built in to take care of these sick people.
I watched my family die from heart disease. I watched my grandmother die from diabetes. I watched my mother suffer from diabetes. Following the guidelines to a T, it doesn't work. Clearly something is broken there. And I think people, more so than a lot of physicians, understand that science needs to evolve.
Well, what if you could get rid of all that for free, right? For free. Like, that's just unbelievable. Then you'd have money to fight poverty, and you'd have money for education. At the same time that everybody's healthier than they ever been. And the crazy part is it doesn't require anything but the right knowledge, which has the potential to save like our entire nation's budget.
Having that diagnosis of borderline diabetes and being told by my family doctor that 6.4%, that was scary. I've had cancer, and the diagnosis of diabetes being delivered to me was so much scarier to me than the cancer diagnosis, because at least with cancer, there's a shot. With diabetes, it's a death sentence, and it's a long, painful, slow, progressive death sentence.
People sometimes say the three most influential people in the history of the world, Jesus Christ, the Prophet Muhammad, and Buddha, probably only agreed on one thing, and that was the power of fasting.
Fasting is an essential part of our Christian faith. Christ taught it by his own example. He also commanded his disciples to fast. When they were trying to help other people out and they weren't so successful, he said these problems are only resolved by fasting and prayer.
The scriptures teach us that there are some things you cannot do if you don't fast. Some miracles cannot happen without fasting.
Fasting is such a personal experience for everyone who fasts. And when it's coupled with prayer, it changes our life.
I truly believe that fasting can change people's hearts.
In the scriptures, from ancient times to the present day, we read about those who fasted, and in the process of fasting, they changed.
I was living in Peru, and I made a decision to go to my mission. My father didn't want me to go. It was for safety reasons. The country had a lot of terrorism problems. So when I went to talk to my stake president, he counseled me to fast and to pray and then to talk to him. So I did. I fasted and I prayed, and then I went to talk to my dad. We cried together, and he told me that, well, let me go to my mission and that I will have his support. It's very meaningful to me because it was regarding my mission to serve, and because of it, my life changed.
It brings me closer to God. I feel spiritual strength coming to me. Temporal blessings come from it. Graduating from high school, I wanted to know which of the two colleges I should go to that I had been admitted to. And I really wanted it to be the right place. And so as I prayed, I determined fasting would really help me. And so I fasted. At the closure of my fast, as I prayed, it was very clear to me the choice that I should make. We believe that it is beneficial both spiritually, physically, and in fact, it has a humanitarian benefit when coupled with helping the poor. A greater compassion for those who are in need and a greater desire to serve them comes from fasting. We learn from the ancient prophet Isaiah that God introduced fasting to the children of Israel. He even said, "This is the fast that I've chosen," and then goes on to say that its purpose is to deal bread to the hungry. We fast once a month for a period of 24 hours, 2 consecutive meals. The monies that are saved from that fast are donated to the poor to help them with all sorts of humanitarian needs. Not enough money to pay the electric bill. They don't have the food necessary for their children, for clothing, etc., to help them get themselves on their feet so they can become self-reliant. Every person has the opportunity to fast, and even the poorest among us sometimes will fast and give what they can in order to help their brothers and sisters.
There is 7 billion people in the world. If we all did this, we would end world hunger.
We're at the site of the Donner Party. There were over 80 individuals. They ended up in Truckee Meadows on Halloween of 1846. And it was right around this spot where they got completely snowed in. And it wasn't until the spring that rescue parties came. You can see the monument behind me. You can see the immigrants are standing on a platform that is 22 feet high. That is how deep the compacted snow was. It got to the point where they took all the bones of the animals and boiled them and boiled them and boiled them till they were reduced to fragments about the size of my pinky fingernail. And these I have seen directly because we excavated them in 2004. There were thousands of fragments that size, and they were boiling them to extract collagen, which was the only source of energy in bone. Some of the stories about the Donner Party, it's heart-wrenching. I mean, these mothers did some unbelievable things just to keep their kids alive. They started utilizing a little bit of human flesh, and that helped sustain at least half of them until the rescue parties came in the spring. When it comes to cannibalism, when the body starts breaking down, shutting down one system at a time, eventually you reach the point where you would do things that you ordinarily would never consider. Once the body is starved of nutrients, once it's utilized muscle, bone, and fat stores, then things start shutting down. The organs of high growth priority, they are maintained until the end, and you might be able to imagine what those would be. The heart continues to beat, you need that. The lungs continue to inhale and exhale air, you need that. And the hind and the midbrain continue to function because they control breathing and respiration and everything else. But interestingly, and this is what surprises people, the sequence that things start shutting down. When you say you would never eat human flesh, that is because you've never been faced with that dilemma, because starvation basically impacts the rational part of the brain. And the cerebellum, the part of the brain that focuses on survival, that's still going, the limbic system. But the part involved in thinking is not going. So, you have to have been there to understand what these people went through.
So it pretty much started with very turbulent teen years. I was 14 when I first moved in with my boyfriend. I was heavily into the kind of drug party scene, like drinking a lot of alcohol, all that kind of stuff. I spent a lot of nights up partying in bars with fake IDs, drinking, not eating properly, subsiding on processed food. Eventually developing septicemia when I was about 16. It started from a really bad case of pneumonia. About 24 hours later, I was in the hospital on intravenous antibiotics for swollen meninges of the brain, septicemia, multiple organ failures, and severe chronic disease. My chances of survival were actually only 40%. Something changed, and it was probably a combination of everything that went on, but I remember leaving the hospital and I wasn't the same person. Any happiness for life was gone. I was very apathetic and depressed. I seemed to be really struggling to believe in a positive future for myself, and self-conscious and a lot more introverted. All of this sort of made me begin focusing on what I felt I could control, which is what I ate, how I looked, how other people saw me. And I think I used, obsession with my body and controlling my intake as a way to be accepted, feel connected to the world and the environment, to be a part of something, to feel home somewhere. I remember looking in the mirror and hating my body and judging it so harshly. So I had a lot of different health conditions. My main conditions, I was dealing with autoimmune thyroid disease, extreme hypothyroid, and a thyroid goiter, so it was actually very difficult to swallow and eat food. I had gastroparesis, so really slow stomach emptying and chronic stomach inflammation and gastritis, probably from years of an eating disorder and antibiotics and all that stuff as well. I had really bad irritable bowel syndrome and chronic inflammatory bowel disease. So I was bloated all the time, a lot of pain in the bathroom, more than anybody should be. And my most painful condition by far, and what actually prompted me to start my YouTube channel, what I really focused on at the beginning, was one of the top 3 most painful conditions that exist, and it was interstitial cystitis. So it's a chronic ulcerative bladder disease, and it's, you know, the symptoms are a lot of urgency, burning, pain, like you have no life really, you know, you're kind of housebound and living in your bathroom in a lot of pain. This is where I lived for 2 years. I was a prisoner in my own bathroom, and I had my identity stripped by my eating disorder. I really didn't have a life at all.
I think the problem is when you do this fasting, basically you're simulating the same kind of situation that impacted the Donners. And if you take it too far, it's exactly what I was saying before. The body starts shutting down.
Anorexics fast all the time. I mean, some people may justify fasting. If they have an eating disorder, they may say, well, look, fasting is fixing all these other medical problems. We know that eating disorders are medical and biological. If we're talking about a brain-based disorder, maybe fasting will fix my eating disorder. Well, anorexics fast all the time. It makes their disorder worse. Bulimics purge food in a number of ways. Self-induced vomiting is the one that people think about, or misuse of laxatives, which actually does nothing to get rid of calories, by the way. But the other thing that bulimics do to purge is fast. So both bulimics and anorexics fast, and it makes their disorder worse. It does not fix it.
We did see that in the archaeological record, you know, bulimics. You know, remember in Rome they had the vomiteria, where they would eat and gorge themselves and then they'd go throw up.
I think that the Romans and the vomitoriums that they would have was sort of a different phenomenon. That was much more of a social activity where people would go and overindulge on purpose, and then they would vomit in order to continue to be able to do that. Patients with bulimia, where they will binge and then purge, often by vomiting, they find that both the binging and the purging to be highly shameful. They will go to great lengths to hide this from their friends, their family. It's not something they feel comfortable doing generally in public.
I remember the first time I actually purged, and it wasn't with intent. I literally had eaten what I thought I shouldn't after a long time of anorexia, after many months of really starving myself to the point of insanity. And I remember I was so hungry, I couldn't, I gave in. It was like a physiological survival urge I couldn't ignore. And I was so anxious while I was eating that I felt such an upset stomach, like it felt like I was doing something so wrong. And afterwards, I mean, I ate until I couldn't breathe, like I couldn't control myself. It was just, I was like, my body needed it. And then I felt so worried and panicky that I was going to gain a ton of weight, destroy everything I had already done. I sort of came in the bathroom really frantic and scared. I sort of leaned over the toilet bowl, and I was so painfully full that just the act of leaning over, I mean, food practically came up itself. And it was so painful coming up. It was like fire lava just shooting out of you. And at the same time, I was flooded with this sense of relief. Like it was like I could get rid of all the shame. I could get rid of all the pain in my life. I could just be back to the way I was before. And then I would feel really panicky and shaky, and I would wonder if anybody heard me, and I would be afraid that I smelled like vomit, and I just felt really dirty and really disgusting, and I wanted to pretend the whole thing didn't happen. So I would rush over to the sink and just put so much toothpaste on my toothbrush, and I was so afraid I had like splatter on me. I just felt so disgusting, I guess, you know, on such a deep level. And then I would sit in the bath for, you know, a long time, and I would just run the hot water over my hands and slash my face and just feel really ashamed and embarrassed and hope that nobody ever knew that I did this, because it felt like the most despicable thing on planet Earth.
When the recovery battle began, I was 145 pounds and 6'3". And now I stand today at 188 pounds. I just have maybe an inferiority complex, if you will. You know, I was bullied as a young kid and going up through high school, and it always made me angry and it made me mad, and it felt like if I could work out harder and if I could watch my diet even tighter, that's a way to like get back at everybody. And it caused me to have very bad social anxiety. It just led me to a life of isolation because I was afraid that I was going to eat something that was unhealthy, or I was afraid that I was going to smell something and want it and not have it, and I would feel massive anxiety. So I would just talk myself out of not going to these places. So I came home for Thanksgiving one year, and my brother handed me this packet that said orthorexia on it, and he threw it at me, and he said, "You have this." Orthorexia is a condition where you take things to the extreme. I specifically remember tracking my calories and burning approximately 1,800 a day and consuming only 1,400. And if ever a day came where those numbers were reversed, I would get so depressed and angry it was unbelievable, and I had to super compensate the next day to make sure that I was burning more than I was consuming. One of the things that happens when you have an eating disorder is you go into this specific type of depression where you just don't find pleasure out of things anymore. The only thing that I really found pleasure out of was exercising in huge amounts and working out really hard and restricting my calories and seeing how far I can actually push it or stretch it. Emotions were all over the place. To say life became a struggle is putting it lightly. I wouldn't go as far as saying that I was suicidal, but I definitely had given up on life and I did not want to live another day. I literally would pray that I would go over to the streets of Manhattan in the afternoon to work, and I would get hit by a bus going out of control, or get killed in gang warfare, or get shot or stabbed to death. I would have to say my lowest point was when I was contemplating jumping into the East River in Manhattan. At that moment, I just started thinking about my mom, who was back home, living by herself, and a lot of my close friends. And I was wondering if they even would have cared, because I didn't. And then my phone rang at the very moment I stepped onto that rung, and it was my friend Jessica back home in Pennsylvania. And it's ironic how timing works in this life, but it couldn't have come at a better time, because she basically talked me down off of that handrail, and I went and sat down on a bench. The root problem was I was so mineral deficient, and I had such lack of food in my system that I just wasn't thinking properly. Never really was about the food per se. It was more about my interaction and relationships with people. Good relationships were fine. Ones that were a little rocky just kind of like triggered me like that. And I would basically take everything out on food and fitness. When I began this journey back to normalcy, it was not easy. It was not an easy road. I had to accept the fact that I was going to gain some weight back. I was 145 pounds, I was 6'3", and I was totally zeroing in on 140. And that's how I worked. I would always go in 5-pound increments. And to me, those were huge victories.
Any food restriction is problematic for somebody who has had an eating disorder, is currently actively trying to get over an eating disorder, who has a family history of an eating disorder. It's likely to send you back into an eating disorder if you have a history of it.
For me, fasting has actually been a remedy in my healing process, and I feel that it has helped my relationship with food. One of the things that works so efficiently for me to keep my eating disorder in check is eating in windows. I feel like I don't have to put as much thought into food. It kind of basically takes my mind off of food. So I become more relaxed, and because of that, it improves my relationship with food.
You don't see too many old fat people, and there's a reason, because being overweight is definitely hard on the system. I'm a bit overweight and I'm worried about it. I might even look into this fasting myself.
There's essentially two forms of fasting that are being advocated currently. The intermittent fasting, which is essentially intermittent feeding, which you narrow the feeding windows, or you may restrict calories on 1 or 2 days or more a week. These can be done safely, often on an outpatient basis. But medically supervised water-only fasting is a little bit more complicated. It does require supervision. It does require a contained environment in order to ensure a safe and effective experience. So when we talk about the long-term water-only fasting, that's done at facilities like the True North Health Center, where people are able to undergo physical exams, laboratory monitoring, be in a controlled and contained environment. And in that type of a setting, fasting can be done, even prolonged fasting can be done safely. It's also important that fasting be applied at patients at the right time. In other words, there are some people that have conditions where they would be better off with a different approach than fasting. Fasting may be too vigorous or may be inappropriate because of complications with medical management, or at least until medications can be withdrawn, etc. So fasting has a wide range of applications, but where it does its best work is in dealing with conditions that are caused by excess. So conditions associated with dietary excess include things like obesity, high blood pressure and other cardiovascular related disease, type 2 diabetes, a host of autoimmune diseases, and even some forms of cancer like lymphoma seem to be intimately associated with our diet and lifestyle choices. And so it makes sense that where dietary excess is a contributing factor to the problem, fasting may be a helpful means of rapidly giving the body a chance to reverse the consequences of dietary excess.
In 1994, I had a head injury, and when I regained consciousness, I had a terrible headache. And prior to the accident, I had been a practicing dentist. So because of the nerve damage to my hands, I also had to quit practicing dentistry. I sought medical advice to get rid of the headache. I visited with several neurologists. They were unable to help me. I also tried some alternative treatments, acupuncture, cupping. Unfortunately, nothing was able to help me. I had a headache every day for 16 years, 24/7. It just never, ever went away. So the neurologist told me that the reason I had this never-ending headache was because the dura mater, or the leather-like covering of the brain and the spinal cord, had been torn and had become inflamed. And then when I saw on the True North website that a number of the health conditions that they treated were based on inflammation, I decided to call and see if maybe their treatment of water-only fasting would be helpful to me.
At the True North Health Center, we take a rather clinical approach to fasting. All patients are carefully screened by both taking their history as well as reviewing their previous medical treatment.
He was very honest in saying that they had never treated a patient with this particular problem, but he thought I might have a chance. When I initially came to True North, they asked me how long I wanted to fast. I didn't know I had a choice in that. I just thought they would tell me.
Fasting protocols here at the True North Health Center can range anywhere from 5 to 40 days, depending on the patient and how they respond. Not everybody or not every condition has a stereotypical amount of time that's associated with its optimum outcome.
And I told them I was going to fast until one of three things happened. Either the headache went away, or I could not fast any longer, or all of the doctors got together and said for my own safety I needed to quit fasting. People have wondered at my commitment to water-only fasting, but you have to remember I had been in serious pain every minute of the day for 16 years. I had tried everything that traditional Western medicine had to offer. I had tried alternatives. I also knew there was a very good chance that I was going to live to be an old lady. We have longevity in my family, and other than this never-ending headache, I really didn't have any health problems. And I did not want to be 80 years old one day thinking, what would have happened if I'd gone to that True North place? I wanted to try everything that was possible to get out of pain. So I started fasting. The doctors come in twice a day.
They're monitored twice a day by staff doctors during their fasting experience, where we're taking vitals and monitoring their conditions.
To check on you, to make sure you're doing well. And every day it was the same question, how are you doing? And every day for 18 days, it was the same answer. I didn't have any change. I still had the headache. But then on day 19, I woke up and I thought, uh-oh, something's wrong. I didn't know what it was, but it was really scary because something was wrong. And I decided I'm not moving out of this bed until I figure out what it was. And I've got to say, it took me about a minute to realize what was wrong is I didn't have a headache anymore. I had forgotten what it felt like not to be in pain. And that lasted for about 5 minutes. And then I went down to tell Dr. Goldhammer. And if possible, I think he might have been more excited than I was. He kept saying, it's amenable to treatment, it's amenable to treatment. So I went through that whole day wondering, because the pain had only been gone for about 5 minutes. Then it came back, and I wonder if this will happen again tomorrow. The next morning I woke up and I had no pain for about 10 minutes. And every day thereafter I had a little more time without pain. But almost even better than that was during the afternoon and evening, my pain was decreasing a lot. When I first got to True North, they asked me what my pain was on the 0 to 10 scale. And my answer was, it's about a 6 to an 8 all of the time, with the exception of those rare moments where it kicks up to a 10, when I truly could not move, when it would stop me in my tracks. And after day 19 and the pain started to reduce over time, it finally got to the point in the afternoon where I was down to a 1 or a 2. You just can't imagine what a blessing that was. And finally, on day 41, I woke up. I had had a whole day without pain. The doctors wanted me to quit, and I was ready to quit fasting. So on that day, I had a full day without pain for the first time in 16 years. Dr. Goldhammer explained that sometimes it takes more than one fast to solve a problem, and it turned out that happened with me as well. When I started the refeeding process, which is a very careful reintroduction of food after fasting, I started to get some twinges of pain on and off. So after 2 months of refeeding, I went back to Dr. Goldhammer and said, and at the time I couldn't believe I was asking to do this again, but I said, I need to fast again, what do you think? And he said he thought that would be a good idea since I had had good results on the first fast. And I said, great, I'll start again tomorrow. And he said, oh no, you can't start fasting right now. You've only been refeeding for 2 months. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he said, you need to rebuild your nutritional reserves. That's very important. And I said, well, how long will that take? And he said, with the length of fast that you've done, probably at least 6 months. And then 6 months to the day after I ended that first fast, I started fasting again. Again, not knowing how long I would fast. And I just kept fasting until all of the pain was gone. Turned out it was another 40 days, and then I started to refeed. And at that point, I didn't have any pain, but I had worries that it would come back. But I just kept following the doctor's recommendations about what to eat, how to eat. And it finally dawned on me one day that that headache was gone. And that was in 2010, and I haven't had a headache since.
Well, I found out about True North through one of the talks that Dr. Goldhammer gave to our medical school. And I remember seeing him and thinking, I definitely need to do an internship there.
We have an opportunity for doctors to train in the use of fasting. We have about 30 clinicians a year that come from medicine, osteopathy, chiropractic, and naturopathic colleges as part of their rotation. They're able to do rotations. We're an ND residency site for the naturopathic profession. And those doctors come in and spend a year. We've recently completed, for example, a fasting safety study, which shows that fasting can be a safe and effective means when it's done properly.
The conclusion was that water-only fasting in a medically supervised facilities such as True North Health, using the True North Health protocol, because we didn't compare any other protocols, is relatively safe.
We're actually very excited because we see a wide range of conditions that tend to respond to this approach, and now we're in a position finally, with the help of our nonprofit True North Health Foundation, to begin to document those results and present them in a way that I think both clinicians and scientists will find acceptable.
What the foundation is now doing is turning that into accepted, peer-reviewed, published research. And so we're doing the human subjects research, bringing people in to look at how fasting changes biomarkers in the blood, taste and adaptation, different studies. So we'll actually have published material that we can show people, and people will start seeing fasting as a modality of healing that really does amazing things and has been for millennia for humans.
For example, in the treatment of high blood pressure, we did a study with our colleague T. Colin Campbell from Cornell University, We took 174 consecutive patients that had high blood pressure, and we put them through a period of fasting followed by a whole plant food, sugar, oil, and salt-free diet. Of the 174 consecutive patients with high blood pressure, 174 people lowered their pressure enough to eliminate the need for medication. And in that study, we were able to demonstrate an effect size of over 60 points, average drop in stage 3 hypertension. That's the largest effect that's ever been shown in treating high blood pressure in humans, as far as I'm aware. Essentially, if you have high blood pressure and you undergo fasting and make diet and lifestyle changes, you have an exceptionally high likelihood of being able to normalize your blood pressure. And if you're willing to do really dangerous and radical things like eat good and exercise, go to bed on time, you have an excellent chance of being able to maintain those results.
The reason I stayed after my residency at True North is because you see that on an everyday basis here. You don't have to be here for years in order to understand the profound effect that water fasting has.
If someone is going to fast for a day or two, most people in the United States are going to have absolutely no issues with that. We have plenty of fat reserves, we can do that. It is important to make sure that people are getting adequate amounts of fluids during that, because dehydration can be very dangerous.
I think what's happening right now is that a lot of people are improvising.
If someone's going to go and say, as you mentioned, a 21-day fast, that is something that I think should actually be monitored, that people are doing well.
So fasting and refeeding cycles are extremely powerful, probably more powerful than a powerful cocktail of drugs. And so when you eliminate the doctor, you eliminate the registered dietitian, you eliminate something that is being clinically tested, you're now really putting yourself in a very dangerous position. And it could be that it's not very dangerous to you today because maybe your immune system is fine, you're not taking any other drugs, but maybe 2 years down the road, you try it again, now all of a sudden you're immunosuppressed, or you have a viral infection, or you're taking a drug for diabetes, or you're taking another drug, and now together they become very problematic, like the infection now could become a lethal infection, or the insulin. Now we know some of the people that have died in clinics that do fasting have died from a combination of insulin and fasting, right? So something, and even when I talk to diabetologists, endocrinologists, and I say, oh, your patient could die, immediately their answer is like, come on, this is not possible. These are doctors, right? These are experienced doctors. They don't realize how combining drug with fasting can turn two very innocuous things into something that can even be lethal. For example, metformin, very safe, very widely utilized. Well, metformin happens to be a gluconeogenesis inhibitor. And guess what? Fasting requires gluconeogenesis. Now you take a blocker of gluconeogenesis and something that requires to survive. If you don't have gluconeogenesis, and gluconeogenesis refers to the liver making new glucose. If you block it on one side and you require it on the other side, you can see you have a very problematic situation there. And now think about the fact that 100 million Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic, and so all of them are eligible. So 1 American in 3 or so is eligible for metformin, and pretty soon will be on metformin. You see how now the combination of fasting or the improvisation with fasting could be extremely dangerous.
This was the scariest thing that I've ever experienced, and I really thought that I was going to lose my life at one point. So I decided to do my 35-day extended water fast in a fasting clinic outside of Canada. I was fasting alongside other people, about 30, 40 people I think we were in total, and it turned out actually that there was a significant issue with the water. And so even with that, even with poor quality water, everybody at the center, from what I witnessed, did really well in general up until about 3 weeks, so up until about 21 days. And after that, things sort of started to go down south, not just for me, but for numerous other people as well. By about day 26, I was really instinctively, I felt a powerful urge to end my fast, and I ignored that urge. And by ignoring that urge, I got really sick. My roommate almost got raped, There was a guy with psychosis who slit his wrist and had to be rushed to the hospital. It turned out he had hyponatremia. So it's where your sodium levels crash so much that your potassium levels skyrocket and you actually go into a mental psychosis. One girl was so dehydrated, she went to the hospital and had to be on IV, and the other girl almost died. I felt helpless. I felt sort of desperate and terrified, like terrified. There was a woman who was there, and her mother came to the center and was terrified because her daughter had been so ill and dehydrated, and she had all the symptoms of renal failure. I felt certain that she was going to die, and I remember being up all night thinking this poor girl came here to save her own life, to heal and repair, and she literally almost died. Her mother took her to the hospital against our fasting supervisor's directive, and she was told that she was in such bad renal failure and so dangerously dehydrated that they weren't sure she was going to make it. What I discovered a little bit late is that it's very important to research a fasting facility and make sure that you're in the care of people that really can medically supervise you, make sure everything's okay. When things turned for me on day 28, I was really fearful for my life. I actually snuck in to use a computer at a time when we weren't supposed to. Wrote messages to personal people in my life, like telling them that I wasn't well and that I was afraid that I would lose my life and that I felt more unwell than I had ever felt. Because I fasted too long and didn't get appropriate care, I think, what ended up happening was I had a lot of health problems. I had something called moon face, extreme inflammation in my face. In my whole body, I had edema and water retention from how dehydrated I had been, how off my electrolytes were. Weight gain, I gained a lot of weight, about 30 pounds actually, or 28 pounds in 2 weeks. As soon as I started eating salt, even small amounts of cooked food. It took me 2 years of eating regularly and nurturing my body and trying to tough out all of these symptoms. I now, 2 years later, am finally completely feeling like myself again. I look like myself again. Fasting needs boundaries. I almost killed myself through extremism with my eating disorder and all of my misuse of food. And then I healed myself through the right modalities, finally brought myself back to health with moderate and balanced intermittent fasting, juicing, eating healthy, developing a healthy relationship to food, and then took it a step too far again and did extremism and almost died again with my long water fast and making myself sick for an additional 2 awful years, only to then find balance again, to finally again go back to a moderate way of just intermittent fasting, getting the benefit without extreme. Fasting needs boundaries.
This is the brilliant part of the fasting mimicking diet, is that at the Longevity Institute they did research for many, many years and discovered how to use food to fly under the radar of what we call mTOR, the detection of food. So you're actually eating food, so your body sees food, but your brain sees fasting.
The NCI, then the National Cancer Institute, gave us the funds to do that, and we came up with a fasting mimicking diet that is as effective as fasting, as water-only fasting.
It's 5 days, but the 5 days of eating the fasting mimicking diet gives you the same benefits as if you did a complete water fast, nothing but water for 4 days.
And we call it fasting with food, which is a fascinating concept. And Nutra, in 2016, launched Prolon, the very first fasting mimicking diet, and Prolon stands for promoting health and longevity.
I first heard about Prolon when I
asked Walter Longo, Dr. Walter Longo, if I could interview him for my website, where I write about healing naturally from inflammatory disorders. We had this wonderful conversation about how his fasting mimicking diet, can turn over up to 40% of white blood cells in the immune system, which is fantastic news because for people with the disorder I had, which is the reason I left CNN and the BBC. I was working as a journalist in war zones for about a decade until I got really sick and I couldn't work anymore, and I devoted myself to blogging about this, about these conditions. Tried the 5-day fasting mimicking diet, the Prolon. My first round of Prolon was pretty amazing. It was the first time in my life that I had had complete relief from my symptoms of mast cell activation. Absolute and total remission of symptoms just so quickly, and it lasted for about a month, I'd say, which is, I've understood that I need to do it once a month. I was diagnosed with a very rare, only 10 to 20% of all cases are this type of cancer, with a very rare and very, very aggressive, it's called triple negative breast cancer. Coincidence, I had just arrived in LA, thankfully, because I was told that I could join a medical trial for their new fasting product, which is called ChemoLeave.
And they're looking at it in cancer patients to improve the efficacy and safety of chemotherapy.
Fasting, we find that mice and probably patients become protected against chemotherapy, and the cancer cells instead don't. When you just use fasting cycles, usually, at least in mice, fasting cycles are as powerful as chemotherapy, but it is the combination of fasting and chemotherapy that is really effective, and that's where we see 20 to 60% of mice becoming cancer-free in response to the combination, and this is true for many different types of cancers.
And that was a number that made me think, okay, so I'm going to do both, especially when I was told that it would protect my body, my immune system, and I just thought, I really can't pass that up. Amazing thing is that I have this pre-existing inflammatory condition, the mast cell activation syndrome, which means that part of my immune system is kind of on the fritz. And it's these cells, the mast cells, are constantly releasing inflammation into the body. And so consequently, we're really susceptible to allergy type things. There's nothing more allergy inducing than chemotherapy, which is why they give you steroids the day before, the day of, and the day after, and then maybe every day after that, depending on how you react. Let me tell you, I went through 1 cycle out of 8 without the ChemoLeave because I fasted, and then there was a scheduling mix-up at the hospital, and I wasn't able to do my treatment that day. So the difference between the time that I went without it and the times that I did the ChemoLeave, I felt myself going into shock while I was receiving the chemotherapy that time without the ChemoLeave, and I firmly believe that I was okay the other times because my immune system was being protected. All the genetic testing that I did revealed was that my tumor had certain characteristics that respond to fasting, which is amazing. So I can actually switch off the genes that were expressing, the troublesome genes that were found in my tumor that were driving the growth of the tumor are turned off by fasting. The reaction of most people when you tell them that you're going through chemotherapy is absolute horror. Nowadays we have medications that can handle the side effects. People are on steroids, they're on 2 or 3 different kinds of antihistamines. They're on medication to stop them from throwing up. They're on medication to help them sleep. They're on beta blockers to block the adrenaline because they're having so much anxiety. They're on Xanax, stuff like that. I didn't take most of what I was given. I was kickboxing for an hour at a time, 3 days a week. I was doing yoga. I was standing on my head. I was doing headstands. I was almost doing acro yoga. I was running up to 45 minutes a day. But the cycle that I didn't do the fasting, I struggled to exercise. I maintained my weight throughout the whole thing. People keep telling me, things happen for a reason, and it's kind of what kept me going through the whole cancer thing and thinking, I need to tell everybody about the fasting. I need to tell everybody because I think it's gonna save sanity. I think it's gonna save lives. Sometimes something is so life-changing that you can't help but want to shout it out to absolutely everybody you meet because what you experienced was so profound.
One of the problems with fasting and fasting mimicking diets are what you're essentially selling is nothing. You're selling the idea that your body can fix itself if we remove all of the outside stimuli. So monetizing that can be a real challenge. Getting people to care and invest money in something where essentially the benefit is other people get better is the ultimate goal, but it's not a very good business model for the most part. That's one of the challenges in getting people to care about this is what's in it for me.
It's a little tricky. What do you do with drugs? And it should be handled by people that have spent a lot of time. So I encourage anybody that is thinking about a clinical trial to contact us and have our contribution in developing the clinical protocol for the trial.
The fasting mimicking diet has been published in the top scientific and medical journals such as Cell, Cancer Cell, Cell Metabolism, JAMA, which is the Journal of the American Medical Association, and Science and Translational Medicine. Recently published just a few months ago a major paper in Cell showing that fasting mimicking diets, some 5 to 6 cycles, are able in mice models to reverse type 1 and type 2 diabetes. This is the first time in history that the reverse of diabetes could be done. And again, it's due to the stem cell rejuvenation. The stem cells in the body, when the body is starved, they actually specialize in beta cells in the pancreas and allow the pancreas to reproduce insulin and decrease glucose in the blood.
Beta cells in the pancreas are rejuvenated, regenerated.
There's nothing in medicine today that can induce these effects.
We think it's a very old program that is not that different from what happens when you cut yourself. So you cut yourself and within a few weeks everything goes back to almost a perfect state. So the body really knows how to repair itself. Is that probably fasting has always been used as a way to get rid of bad cells, turn on stem cells, regenerate for tens of thousands of years. And now in the last 100 years or so, we eat so much all the time. And most patients that we talk to have never gone more than a day or so without food.
So it turns out that once you get to about the 3rd day of not having any food, then your body has to go into action.
After 2 days, either on a complete fast or a fasting mimicking diet, now the body starts really entering a starvation response mode.
The body then starts shedding elderly cells and cells with DNA damage because these are consuming calories, they're not doing their job right though. And then the body starts pushing the stem cell, the young, cost-effective from a calorie standpoint cells, pushes them to actually replace those. And now you have new cells in the body replicating and taking action. This is what we call part of the rejuvenation in the body due to the consecutive or longer period of fasting, what we call today prolonged or periodic fasting.
In terms of stem cells, you will not stimulate stem cells, you won't get brain-derived neurotrophic factor increased unless you fast for at least 3 to 4 days.
You need to realize that stem cells are the repairmen of the body. They're all over your body and they're constantly working to repair little bits of damage that happen every day. But think what would happen if those stem cells stopped doing their job. And that's what happens in a lot of patients who really aren't living a healthy lifestyle, is those cells can get hurt and they're not doing their job, so injuries stack up. In 2004, I was reading an animal study on a rabbit that showed that you could take mesenchymal stem cells and regrow a disc. Obviously that caught my attention because we had a lot of back pain patients with bad discs. So I sought out some researchers that were using mesenchymal stem cells to treat injuries, and they were doing it in horses, and so we ported that over to humans. So to date, we've published 50% of all of the patients in the world literature who have been treated with stem cells and who have orthopedic problems. What we can say at this point is that the environment that your stem cells are in can have a dramatic impact on their ability to grow, proliferate, and do what they're supposed to. That environment can be affected by diet, can be affected by exercise, can be affected by medications.
Everything in the body has multiple functions, multiple sites of action. So when you give a drug that you think is working in one site, it's working and doing things all over the body in ways that we may not even comprehend. That's why when you look at pharmaceuticals, the list of side effects are huge, and often including death. If you've watched television and you see the commercials for many of the pharmaceuticals, they actually show people having a wonderful time, and then they say, and by the way, this drug may kill you. That is one thing that does not happen when you eat the right foods, when you exercise, when you incorporate periodic fasting.
So what we found was that high blood pressure medications, cholesterol medications, these are common things taken by many, many different Americans, but they hurt their stem cells' ability to grow in culture. So that's not a good thing. If you think about the fact that these medications are impacting your body's own stem cells and their ability to maintain and repair that body, that's a big problem. So as an example, we've treated lots of patients through the years with tendinopathy due to taking a specific type of antibiotic.
I literally became debilitated. I had shoulder pain, neck pain, leg pain. I could barely walk. I even had a hard time breathing. 2 of my discs had completely herniated into my spine. I really felt I was dying.
Now this is a known problem. They'll take this antibiotic because they have a common cold, and the next thing they know, they're in chronic pain all over their body. Why? Because that particular antibiotic reduces the stem cells' ability in their body to repair their tendons. And we all get tendon wear and tear every day that needs to be repaired. So one of the things we started realizing is that when we were going to use the patient's own cells to try to repair something, we had to have patients clean up their lifestyle, including their diet. We make sure that they're fasting when they come in because we know that fasting can increase the body's ability to help repair itself.
For the next several weeks after each time I do a fasting mimicking diet, I end up with significantly reduced pain in all of my joints.
Polycystic ovary syndrome, that's one of my niches. I deal a lot with hormones. If you take an unhealthy woman and you trick her body into getting pregnant, often it will be rejected, and if it's successful, it's not usually very successful because she often will have very severe complications later on towards the end of pregnancy, like high blood pressure, toxemia, preterm labor, a lot of diabetes, many, many complications in these women when they do not get them healthy but trick them into getting pregnant. So then she came to me and she just said, I've tried the conventional route. I've spent thousands of dollars trying to get pregnant, and what I've heard that there's this integrative approach. So what can you do to help me? She did everything I asked. So she had a large breakfast, she had a medium lunch, she had a tiny dinner, she didn't eat after 7 p.m. She began exercising, she ate no processed foods. She did everything right. Then after a month, I put her on Prolon. After 3 cycles, she got pregnant. That was almost a year ago. And she has recently delivered her baby. She has a beautiful, healthy baby. She's in her late 30s now. She's been trying for all these years.
Depending on the therapeutic use, you have to really understand this and use it to your advantage. So for example, when we do it for metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and cancer, we do between 4 and 5 days of fasting together with various therapies. That's sufficient. When we look at autoimmunities instead, we go to 7 days. Why do we do that? Because we now want to do more destruction of damaged cells, the autoimmune cells in this case. So if you do a shorter fast, you're not really going to benefit that much because you don't have enough time to destroy the damaged cells, and also you have less rebuilding using the stem cells, right? So this is why it's so important to understand the mechanisms behind it, and for each purpose, really using a different fasting-based intervention.
I was working on a documentary for the BBC, What If We Could Stay Young Forever? We were looking at diet and exercise and lifestyle. I met Dr. Walter Longo to talk about his work, and it was at the time he was preparing for his clinical trial and suggested that I might like to be one of the volunteers in that trial. So the trial involved what is known as a fasting mimicking diet over 5 consecutive days, and that was repeated 3 times.
One of the things that our large clinical trials have shown is that at the very least we know that fasting mimicking diets are safe for the average person.
Probably the number one thing that I noticed is weight control.
For the past year, I have prescribed prolonged diet to about 120 or 130 patients. A lot of them come to me saying, I tried all the diets and I can't lose weight. Well, I tell them, well, let me prove you wrong. Let's try this diet and you will see that you will lose weight. All of them have lost weight.
The other things we saw is that you do have to train the body. It's a little bit like working out. If you just do this once for 5 days, you'll get a lot of the benefits. Quite a bit of weight loss, a number of other metabolic markers may be affected as well, but you will eventually return to normal if you make no other lifestyle changes over the period of the next several weeks to months. If you do this consecutively for 3 months in a row of 5 days at the beginning of each month, we see that you maintain a much more significant amount of the benefits over a much longer period of time.
I find prolonged to be a breakthrough in the care that I give to diabetics.
Ideally, once a quarter is about what appears to be the kind of set point to keep that sort of cellular muscle tone, as you will, to keep the body in shape for nutrition. Dr. Longo actually did a study where he did 2 groups of mice. One group they both ate the same total calories during the study. One group had fasting mimicking mixed in and then overate, and the other group ate the same amount the whole time. And the group that overate with fasting mimicking diet was still skinny, and the other group of mice was obese. So it is really about training the cells how to use nutrition. You can take in even potentially less good for you foods if your body is in shape, and it'll do the right things with them.
People say they've lost up to 8 pounds a week. They have more energy, they feel better.
I've been trying to convince this patient for months and months, maybe a year, to try to give up his soda. It just took 5 days with prolonged for him to stop.
This is the brilliance of the fasting mimicking diet, that we get to harness our inner powers to heal while simultaneously enjoying food. So what could be better?
So what we've been teaching here since 1956 is that people ought not to be eating solid food until approximately 10 o'clock or so in the morning. We wind down in the evening. Ideally, you don't eat after 5, but the latest would be 6 or 7 o'clock at night, providing you go to bed then 3 hours later. Now, this is something we've observed with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people for over 60 years. This is no longer a theory or a philosophy, and the scientific community now has validated what we've been observing in a clinical setting. So all of our guests here are encouraged to do at least a 1-day-a-week fast.
I had the privilege of directing one of the most renowned fasting clinics in Europe, in Sweden. So the government realized they needed to do research, and they spent about $2.5 billion to find, it was like 90% success rate. And we actually got certified. And by doing that to us, any physician that thought, well, you have an inflammatory problem, because fasting was definitely something that worked as an anti-inflammatory with arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and gout, and asthma, emphysema, psoriasis, eczema, you name it, everything just about under the sun, and diabetes, cardiovascular, obesity, Crohn's, colitis, then actually 80% of their fee would be paid by the government. So this was back in the mid-70s and ran until beginning of 80s. It disappeared when a new group came into the government. The problem is it wasn't replaced by something that was even better. They didn't have 90% success rate. I think those people were influenced by money, as simple as that.
I was driving and all the cars were disappearing into like abyss, into a mirror. And the white lanes were going up and down. And my head was pounding so bad that I felt like someone was taking a crowbar and pulling apart my head. I pulled over on the side of the turnpike. I had a 4-pound brain tumor that was surgically removed at the National Institutes of Health. It was the biggest ordeal that I ever went through. They drilled 6 holes into my head and 47 staple scar. When I was diagnosed with 2 more brain cancers, I fell apart. I could not handle having surgery. I couldn't handle chemo.
Here at Hippocrates, ever since 1956, we've been dealing with tens of thousands of people who have cancer.
In October of 2012, I found a lump in my breast.
It was cancer. This cancer had grabbed a hold of everything behind my knee and bundled it. So they couldn't do anything but cut my leg off above the knee.
And the last 3 oncologists that we consulted with, second and third opinions, all said the same thing, that she has to have the leg removed or she's going to die. No mistake about that.
Of course, fasting has always been a big part, a significant part of the caloric intake and dietary part of our program. But those who condone water fasting, in the case of people who are in the conquest of all forms of cancer, we don't think it's really prudent. You need caloric intake, you need the protein that literally comes from the juices we suggest here, which are non-sugary juices made out of green vegetables, green leaves, and most important, sprouts that have very high amounts of amino acids. And these amino acids are something that the body requires to maintain the strength and the viability of the cells. Now, we're made of cells. You have 100 trillion cells that make up your body. And this tends to break down. The emaciation you see from cancer basically is a protein degradation.
I ended up doing it for 3 months. And when I went back to the oncologist, I did the MRI with contrast. We got the results, no cancer.
I maintained this lifestyle very strictly for a full year, and at the same time continued to see that lump diminish until now it's gone.
At Hippocrates.
91, this little girl is 90.
For 21 years, I have been cancer-free. We are great dancers. We now teach people at Golden Lakes to dance.
How about a kiss?
Yeah.
I get these horrible skin rashes on my face, on my body. Coming to a place like Hippocrates would make my life and just the fasting experience a lot easier.
For me, just doing water fasting wasn't going to work. Even more than a day was very difficult, just for me personally. I can only speak from personal experience. But if I were to do the juice fasting, it was easier because I was able to still have that intake of food.
And today is actually the 4th day that I'm coming out. I'm easing myself gently out of the fast. My skin just smoothing out. I didn't have the red marks I usually have on my arms and on my face.
I didn't always feel this way about fasting. In fact, I was pretty opposed to it.
Dr. Mercola and I have been together 8 years, my significant other. So we did the program in 2012 here at Hippocrates, and I think it inspired him.
I've come to the conclusion that there is no single more powerful metabolic intervention that can be used than fasting. In fact, when people, friends or relatives come to me now with a heart attack or cancer, in almost every case that is the first step I'll have them do, because it's going to jumpstart their ability to burn fat for fuel and increase all the metabolic benefits that you get from doing that.
I lost 40 pounds in 90 days on a juice fast. Never gained it back.
So the problems we have today, that 2/3 of Americans are obese, 5% morbidly obese, diabetes, cancer, arthritis, all of this should never have happened. We had the solution in the 70s. We really need to realize there's nothing new under the sun. Get back on the track with your own lifestyle. Whatever religion, whatever country you come from, I think you will agree with this. We have to take our responsibility in our own hands and have the life for our family, for our children, our grandchildren, that they deserve. They deserve an amazing life. And I think most of us are looking right now at the future and saying, well, how are they going to deal with this? How are they going to deal with the diseases? How are they going to deal with food that's not nutritious, with all the chemicals, the pollution in our water, in our air? How are they going to deal with it? Well, it's time we deal with it.